Thank you, Dilani, for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. We have a lot to discuss.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Desiree.
So, to start off the interview, I want to ask, what has your relationship with storytelling been like? And has reading and books always been a part of your life?
Yeah, I never wanted to be an author when I was growing up. I it's just not something I thought about, but I had as I was growing up, especially when I was like 10 to sort of 18 years old, I was just reading nonstop, reading a lot of fantasy and science fiction, I would say. And as I grew up more and got a job and all
Mhm.
those things, and life kind of got in the way of me reading so much. But I think that spark of just being immersed in a fantasy world and being able to tell that story never really left. So over time, I realized that, hey, this would be a fun thing to try out. So that's how I started dabbling in writing. And then it really became something that I just started loving, and it became a part of my day. So, but the reading and the books really was the beginning of that love
Mm.
of fantasy and just storytelling.
And you graduated from Harvard with a PhD in theoretical physics. What gravitated you to this field?
I even as a kid, I was always really fascinated by just the universe and the solar system and the galaxy, and I was always asking my mom and dad about how do these things work, and just it's so vast and fascinating that I kind of kept that curiosity throughout my high school. And so I did a lot of science, not exactly knowing that I was going to end up becoming really interested in physics, but towards the end of my high school, I did my high school in Australia. I became really, really interested in physics. Physics was so fascinating to me because it's trying to answer the questions about both the very, very small things
Mm.
and the very large things, and they're connected, and so many mysteries. So I did a lot of physics when I was in what in Australia is called uni, undergrad, college in the US. And I got this amazing opportunity to study at Harvard, and I was like, what an amazing way to spend 5 years of my life thinking
Mm.
about the deep mysteries of the universe. So it was that's how I got there, and it was an amazing time.
And going from, theoretical physics to the author world, how was that transition like for you?
Well, quite different. It's different in some ways and similar in other ways. So after my PhD, I actually decided to move more into the business world. So I went into sort of the tech world and
Mm.
started working in tech. But writing at the beginning was quite challenging for me because I didn't know how to write. I just wanted to tell a story, but I didn't quite have the skill set yet. So that part of it took a while. And that's why it took me
Mm.
so long, because I had to learn and I had to iterate and I had to try and fail and see what worked for me and figure out my style. But the thing that really helped me from my physics days was thinking about this like really big picture. I did when I was a physicist, I worked on something called model building, which is like a simple way of explaining that is how do you come up with basically a mathematical model that explains how all the parts of the universe fit together into this like neat story that makes sense to us. And really, I had to build up that world for Blood Moon Prophecy. And obviously, I wasn't writing any equations, but
Mm.
the idea that all the pieces need to make sense together for someone to feel like, oh, this could be real. This is a real
Mhm.
a place that I could imagine myself in. That the logic around figuring that out, I think, was not that different.
And I do want to touch a little bit. You mentioned, you were in tech. And as a woman in tech, how was that like for you?
Well, I am. So I have my day job. So I'm a the head of product at for automation at a company called Atlassian, and have was previously at Facebook or Meta. So I have been in tech throughout this whole time as I'm writing, and it's been a very interesting journey. I think there aren't as many women in tech
Mm,
as I thought there was. And I think as you become more senior, there's even fewer.
mm,
Um, but I think over the last few years, it's gotten better. And I have seen the women leaders I work with try harder to advocate for women, to lift them up and to give them opportunities. And I've definitely benefited from that. And for my own team, that's something I think you have to create
mm.
opportunities for people. You have to find them and you have to give them a chance. And I found that when you do that, and when you really think about building very balanced teams and make an effort, it does improve the balance and how everybody works together.
And you mentioned Blood Moon Prophecy, and that's your recent release. Can you talk a bit more about the book and the inspiration behind it?
Yeah. Blood Moon Prophecy is a fantasy. I would say it's a fantasy in the genre, more like it's like a urban Harry Potter-esque fantasy, and it's supposed to be sort of mysterious and adventurous, and it's set in an ocean world. So in Blood Moon Prophecy, the protagonist is Tilly Nix. She's 16 years old, and she's running into these very mysterious circumstances while she's living in New York. Like, uh, and she knows that she's not from there, but she can't figure out how to get to where she came from. And suddenly, through a set of things and a bunch of people who come to rescue her, she's thrust into this ocean world called Maria, where she discovers that her family actually has secrets that go back millennia. And she's at the center of this mystery. And all this time, there's sort of magical ships and ocean monsters, and the magic system is based on sprites, or what I call sprites. And she has to navigate through this deep mystery and people who don't want her to unravel that mystery. And along the way, she's been a lonely kind of 16-year-old, not had the best time. She figures out, where she belongs and what family means to her.
And you mentioned how, this was an 8-year long journey, writing this book, and, you have a full-time job. So how did you balance that, going between writing and, your full-time job?
It was I'm not gonna pretend it wasn't easy. I'm a bit of a night owl. So
Mm,
after I, come home from work and all the work stuff is wrapped up, I started sort of forcing myself to do a little bit of writing early on. And then it kind of became an escape for me. And
mm,
obviously it helped that I was like writing this amazing story. So I could also escape into this amazing world for a couple hours of my day. And I think the thing that helped was just consistently, I had consistently from like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, I would set aside at least an hour. And
mm.
so then after a while, I began to look forward to that. And no matter what else was happening in my day, I could always just carve out that time. But I definitely, for the last 8 years, did not get as much sleep as I wanted to. But I'm so, so glad I saw it through and that it's out and people are reading it.
And you mentioned how writing wasn't necessarily your strongest skill, but you were able to do it. So how did you, I guess, what was your writing process like, and how did you hone in your skill?
The thing that I did that I think really paid off was I didn't sort of start by taking like a writing course. I just said,
Mm,
okay, I knew I wanted to write this story. I'm just going to start writing. So I literally opened up my laptop one day and wrote the first paragraph of the book. And that paragraph has changed quite a lot since then. But that I think was the hardest part. After that one paragraph where I had gotten over this, like, oh, can I write? Maybe I won't be a very good writer. That once I started writing, that was a really fast way for me to figure out where what parts of my writing needed to be improved and how to find my own storytelling voice. Um, the I think if I had instead sort of taken more theoretical like courses, I don't think
mm,
that would have translated particularly well. But over time, I got a lot of coaching when I had written a little bit, I was like, okay, well, I think I need to get some feedback. I put this in front of people. I put it in front of editors, and like, help me understand how I can make this better and more compelling. And I got a lot of feedback. Feedback is hard to get when someone tells you this part of your story could be improved, but I think if you're open to it, that kind of helps you refine over
Yeah.
time. And obviously, like, the other thing that was helpful was when you read books, you're just absorbing the story normally. But when you're an author trying to learn how to write, you're like, well, how did this author make this particular thing feel this way?
Yeah.
And how did they write? So I did a lot of that, and it took some time.
And creating a fantasy realm that's both inclusive and accessible can be hard, but you did it so eloquently in your book. How did you come up with your characters, and have people you met in your life influence some of those characters?
It was really important to me that someone could read this book anywhere in the world and feel like they could imagine themselves in here. And when I was little and I was reading sort of very classic fantasy stories like
Mm.
Lord of the Rings, it didn't really feel that way. I still love those stories. Um, so when I was writing this, I very consciously wanted to bring some of that cultural diversity in. So, and I drew on what my life was like around that
Mm.
age when I was about 16. I lived in Melbourne, Australia, um, and it's a melting pot of cultures. Really, there's a lot of um, people from Southeast Asia and Asia and really all over the world. And when I was in school, it was a little like my friend group was a little bit like what you see Tilly's friends are in the book. And then I wanted to draw on that. And I felt like just having such a diverse group of friends was, I just loved it. It made such a difference to the way I look at the world and how open I am to ideas and different cultures. And I wanted to kind of, and it's fun. It's like fun to eat
Right.
new food and fun to
Yes.
experience new cultural traditions. And um, so I wanted to really bring that out in the book. So
Mm.
you'll see things like Sri Lankan food, which is I'm Sri Lankan. You'll see that kind of sprinkled throughout. You'll see nods to Holi, which is a Hindu festival, and yeah, you'll see a woman in a sari, and you'll see sort of but in the middle of that, you'll see like burgers and ramen, and like the food is honestly a major way that I bring a lot of
Mm.
that in. Also, just because I just love writing about food. It's just
Right. But like you mentioned, I think food is something that kind of unites us all in a way, because like you could share dishes with somebody and talk about it, and you end up learning something. So that's pretty cool. Um, and how has your author journey been like, from getting a publisher and, to seeing your book on a shelf?
yeah, I took a bit of a non-traditional route actually. For a long time, I was writing this book, and it was all about figuring out how to write the best story. And I actually, so I'm an indie author, so I self-published this book. It was edited very professionally, and I had a lot of help from Books Fluent, sort of getting it produced and professional. So the thing that you're reading shouldn't be any different from a big publishing house book. Um, that journey was really interesting because I had to understand, well, how do I get this book out into the world, and how do I find people who want to read this, and how do I make this book look and feel like any other book? That was almost as hard as the writing journey itself, but I learned a lot along the way. At the end of the day, I'm really glad that it's done now and it's out. I think what's different is figuring out when you have a big publisher, there is sort of a lot of uh, press or buzz
Mm.
around, and figuring out when you're an indie author, how do you create that and how do you get people excited about it and get
Mm.
the word out? I think that's the harder part to figure out. But I'm kind of working through it and learning as I go.
Do you see like social media as as something that has helped you kind of, promote your book?
Yeah, definitely. I was actually blown away by, particularly on sort of Book Talk and
Mm.
Instagram. There's such an avid community of fantasy readers and fantasy authors. I had no idea until I really started sort of thinking about how do I reach an audience, how do I talk to people out there. And that's been really awesome to see. And so a lot of Instagrammers have like talked about the book and reviewed it, and that's been awesome. And sort of TikTok and Instagram in particular have been sort of the two social media apps that I'm on, and that's where people can reach me if they want to.
Following questions are questions that are some of our local Glendale teens wanted to ask you. The first question is, what kind of relationship do you hope to have with your readers?
I would love to have like an ongoing just conversation with readers. I just want to hear from them. I want to know what they liked and what they didn't like, and what do you want to see in the next book. How does this remind you of like your own childhood or other books you've read, and how did you feel reading about it? I just want to hear from them. And then I'd love to sort of write more books in the series, and want to be influenced by what they think of the book and where they want to see the characters go.
Who would you say was your biggest role model growing up?
My role models growing up were fairly local. They were like
Mm.
not like big, like famous people, honestly. And obviously, I looked up to famous people, but I had a lot of inspiration from my mom and dad. Um, they migrated from Sri Lanka to New Zealand when I was about 10 years old, and they did a lot of things, that they sacrificed a lot so that my brother and I could have this better life that they couldn't give us back in Sri Lanka. And it was hard for them, and I think they never let us really feel it. And
Mm.
as a result of them doing that, I like the fact that I got to go to Harvard and all do all these things is because of that. So pretty early on, I was inspired by um, what they did, and as a parent, what you do to
Mm.
give your kids the best chance. So there were many role models, but I would say my parents. I looked up to my parents a lot, and still do.
Do you have a favorite genre you enjoy reading the most, and how does that affect your writing?
Yes. Well, I have two, and it's a little unusual. So I like reading fantasy, but not always like high fantasy,
Mm.
not maybe not like Game of Thrones style. I still read those, but um, more sort of this portal fantasy style where you're still
Mm.
kind of feel like maybe you're in touch with this world. Um, so that's one genre. I actually also really like reading classics. That's the other genre. I love, like, my favorite author is actually Jane Austen.
Oh, okay.
And so and that's almost like reading fantasy, because that world is so dark. I mean,
Right.
so different from what we experience today. And um, so I love reading both. And um interesting, like, you can learn quite a lot from the way that those authors wrote and didn't write back then. I think we write in
Mm.
a very different style, but the characters, especially like in those older stories, I find are like fascinating and so well written. But yeah, those are my two favorite genres. But I try to read a little bit of everything, and you can learn a lot from just reading other genres that you don't normally gravitate to.
And do you have any advice for any teen that would want to, self-publish a book? Any
Yeah,
tips?
yeah, for sure. Um, I think the first thing is just to write, get your writing done. And like I said, there's lots of classes and things you can take, and I think those have a place. Um, but actually just writing, starting to write, getting your story down, getting a bad version of your story in front of people and asking for advice. that's my number one tip. Start getting it in front of people and start putting it on the page. And for self-publishing, it is actually remarkably easy to get your work out there. But the tip that I would give is it's easy to get your work out. It's harder to make sure that your work is quality and good.
Mm.
So if you can, find someone who can edit it for you, and make sure it's really like someone reading your self-published work and someone reading a book from Random House or Penguin. There shouldn't be a quality difference.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
I would say start writing, get your work edited and get feedback on it. And I think you have to get it out there and see how people respond to it. There's only so much you can do before getting the book out. You have to get one out, see what people think, and then you figure out, what do people want to read, and how will you do the next thing.
I am curious, how did you decide on the book cover? How was that process like? Because it's a beautiful, cover. So I was just curious about that.
It's such a story. So the cover early on, I have a friend that I worked with when I was at Etsy as a designer, and I had asked if he would do my book cover. And he designed this really beautiful cover that had the 4 characters on it. And then, it took me like another 2 years to finish the story, but in that time the story had changed a little bit, and
Mm.
I couldn't quite use that cover. And he had just had a kid, and he wasn't able to design another cover for me. So I was like, okay, let me go find something that reflects the slightly like updated version of the book. And honestly, I was just looking around trying to figure out what strikes me and what captures me, and captures what the book feels like. And I just saw this cover on the internet as I was browsing, and I was like, that's the one. That's the one. And she was a very not like a big designer or anything, and I reached out to her and was like, hey, I'd love to get this. I had it customized a little bit, and it was just, I came across it by luck and I loved it. Like, just, I knew it as soon as I saw it. So it was a journey for sure, but
That's awesome.
you never know how people are going to respond to book covers, or whether they love it, or it's whether you love it and they don't.
Mm.
But I felt like I was really lucky that I came across it.
That's awesome. So before we end, we have some rapid fire questions to ask. The first question is, what is your favorite color?
It's actually this one. This
Oh,
kind
okay.
of like it's like a teal.
Mm.
It's funny because I have 2 kids and I always ask them what their favorite color is, and it changes every week. Uh, Mine these days it's this one.
When are you the happiest?
This is gonna sound cliche, but actually, this is actually true. When I'm in the middle of writing, and I have like my little cup of tea and my pajamas, and I'm writing and I'm like deep in the story,
Mm.
that's when I feel the happiest. And also when I'm just like with family and friends
Mm.
and just like around the table eating type thing. Those are the two that I would say.
Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Take more risks. It's it becomes harder and harder to take risks and do crazy things. So just go for it and fail a little bit more. That's okay. That's what I would say. Just go for it and fail a little bit more.
If you could have 3 people, dead or alive, for dinner guests, who would they be?
Well, Jane Austen would definitely be one of them. Well, I've always wanted to talk to Bill Gates.
Mm.
He's a very interesting person. I think he thinks about a lot of the big problems in the world. Don't know how good he would be as a dinner guest with Jane Austen. Uh, then I've been really into this new the Picard Star Trek series. So Captain Picard has been one of my like hero characters that inspired a lot, like one or two of the characters in the book.
Mm.
So I'm going to pick a fictional one and say I'd love to have Captain Picard at my dinner table too. So like a
Oh,
dead one, a fictional one, and a real one.
right. I love that. Do you have a song that you have on repeat currently?
Taylor Swift. Not anything like super deep, but I love her new album. It's so
Yes.
funny. My kids love it too. I have like a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they're always like,
Oh,
Taylor Swift. I'm
oh,
like, yeah.
that's so cute. What do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah, I think that in the biggest sense, I want people to have um remember me as someone that created these stories, characters, and worlds that meant a lot to them when they're, whatever stage of life they're in, but particularly, kids growing up, teenagers. I remember that period of life, and books had a big impact on me. Stories had a big impact on me. And if I could do that and be remembered, I almost think, so funny. We probably remember authors from 200 years ago more than like business people from 200 years ago. And so I think stories have this lasting power to take people into a new place. So that's how I want to be remembered, as someone who made these amazing worlds that people could escape into and enjoy.
What is a book that you have read recently or are currently reading that you would recommend?
The last book I read uh, was the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Oh,
So
yeah.
not a fantasy book. So like I said, I like to read a few different things from a few different
Mhm.
genres, and it was really good. So I definitely recommend people pick that one up. I loved it. I thought it was so different from the kind of thing that I normally read.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I'm actually thinking of picking up Jane Austen again, and haven't read Jane Austen in a long time. So just as a pure self-indulgence. So
Well, thank you so much. We learned a lot about you. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to sit down with me and talk. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they could connect with you?
thank you for having me. I love talking about this book. So if you want to reach out, my website is just delanywrites.com. You can learn more there. I'm on Instagram, Delani Writes. You can message me or go check out what's there. Same with TikTok. And in terms of new projects, I'm beginning to think about what the next book should be. I mean, I know what I want to do with it, but thinking
Mhm.
about, well, how am I going to get there? So that's exciting. And yeah, I'd love to know what you think. Love to know how you found the story and where you want to see the characters go. So hit me up.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much. It means a lot that you were here with me today. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.